All right, so get this. You're a game developer, and you just spent years pouring your heart and soul into this groundbreaking new mechanic, right? You're so excited to share it with the world. And then, bam, somebody else is saying they own the rights to it because they patented it.
Oh, wow.
It sounds like something out of like a dystopian sci-fi novel or something.
Right.
But that's the kind of crazy world that we're diving into today, video game patents.
Yeah.
And specifically, we're looking at the recent Nintendo lawsuit against Palworld. It's a game that's drawing a lot of comparisons to Pokémon.
Uh-huh.
And we're going to use this case to explore this really interesting debate, this battle between protecting innovation and potentially stopping it.
Yeah, and what's so fascinating about this is, it's not just a matter of is Palworld a Pokemon clone or not? It really gets at this much bigger question of like, how do we even begin to decide what ideas can be owned in the digital world, especially in video games?
Yeah, because we're talking about like patenting actual game mechanics here, not just characters or stories.
Right.
We're talking about things like dialogue trees. Those choose your own adventure style conversations.
Yeah.
Those are getting patented.
It's wise.
Even like the Nemesis system,
yeah.
which for those who don't know, that's that really cool game design where enemies in the game world remember your past encounters and they like evolve based on like how you've interacted with them.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's some really next level stuff.
It's amazing.
And if you think about it, that was a major, major feature in the Shadow of Mordor games.
Yeah.
And like the technical side of it, it's really impressive. You're talking AI programming, that tracks what the players are doing, how they're fighting the enemies.
Oh, man.
It creates a really dynamic experience for the player, unlike anything else.
Imagine like the coding nightmare behind that.
Oh, absolutely.
But then you have to think about it from the other side, too. If a studio invests all this time and energy into making something this complex, shouldn't they have some kind of protection so somebody doesn't just come along and copy it?
Oh, 100%. And that's exactly like the main argument, right, for having these strong patent protections. They say, look, this is how we encourage people to come up with new ideas.
Right.
Because it protects their work.
Right.
And it acknowledges all the creative energy that goes into these features.
Okay, so before we go too far down this rabbit hole of, legal stuff,
right,
let's break down what we're talking about when we say intellectual property, because that could mean a lot of different things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at its core, it's really anything that comes from someone's mind, their creativity.
Okay.
And then within that world of intellectual property, you get different categories.
Yeah.
And today we're really zoning in on patents. So these are specifically for things that are new inventions,
Right.
processes, designs, or in our case, game mechanics.
Right.
And this is different from things like copyright, which protects, your art, your music, your writing.
Okay.
And then there's trademarks, which, safeguard the brand names, logos, all that jazz.
So we're talking about when it comes to these video game patents, we're talking about like the legal right to these mechanics and these systems and even the technology that makes these games unique.
Exactly.
But as we've kind of already hinted at, this is where things get a little messy sometimes.
Oh, for sure. Because patents, you're right, they're supposed to help people be more creative. But some people say that they actually do the opposite.
Yeah.
They actually stop creativity. And to really get this, we have to look beyond just Nintendo and Palworld. We got to look at some other, famous cases in the history of video games.
Yeah, because as it turns out, Nintendo is not the only company that's been, very active when it comes to protecting their stuff.
Not at all. Let's go back in time a little bit to like the early days of video games.
Okay.
You remember those side-scrolling games where the action kind of like moved sideways as your character went along?
Oh, yeah.
Like that's so common now, but back then that was like groundbreaking stuff.
Oh, for sure. Like the original Super Mario Bros.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I can still hear that music in my head.
The best.
So imagine being the company that came up with that side-scrolling stuff, right?
Yeah.
You might think, hey, we should get a patent to protect this. Like that's our invention.
Yeah, you would think so.
And that's actually what happened. A company called Atari, they got a patent for a certain kind of side-scrolling tech back in the early 80s.
Wait, so they were trying to patent the whole idea of side-scrolling?
Well, not the entire thing, but their patent was written so broadly that it caused a bunch of legal fights with other developers who were using similar ideas in their games.
Wow.
And it really started this debate about whether a core mechanic like that, something as basic as side-scrolling, should even be something you could patent.
Yeah, that's such a good point. That's a huge part of gaming. It's crazy to think that one company could own that.
Exactly.
So is that an example then of a patent kind of like holding back how games could have evolved?
It's possible. Some people say that if Atari had been able to really enforce that patent, really put their foot down, it could have really limited what the video game industry could do.
Yeah.
Like instead of having all these awesome side-scrolling games we have now, we might have gotten just a tiny sliver of what was possible.
It makes you wonder how many other game ideas are just out there that never happen because of these patent battles, you know?
That's a really good point. People who are against these super broad patents, they worry that it scares developers away from trying new things,
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
especially smaller studios.
Right.
They might avoid experimenting with certain mechanics because they're afraid of getting sued.
Yeah, especially if they don't have the money to fight it in court.
Exactly.
It's like a gamble they can't afford to take.
And it's not just the fear of lawsuits either, right? Think about it. You're a small team. You got this amazing idea for a new mechanic. You're putting everything into it, right? Yeah. And then you find out some big company, they already have a patent on something super similar. Even if you're sure your idea is different enough, do you have the money and the time to go to court and prove that?
Probably not, especially if you're going up against a company like Nintendo. I mean, they're known for, really protecting what they made.
Yeah, Nintendo has a long history of being very protective of their games. And they're not afraid to take legal action, whether it's against like fan-made games or even websites sharing their old games.
Yeah.
They even went after a company making those cartridges for knitting machines.
What?
Yeah, because people were using them to make Pokémon designs.
I mean, come on, that's a little much, don't you think?
It's definitely a complex issue, and both sides have valid points.
Right.
On the one hand, yeah, being too aggressive with lawsuits can really stifle creativity and make it hard for new developers to break into the industry, right?
Right.
On the other hand, companies put a lot of money and time into making these games. And without legal protection, someone could just come along, copy their work, and basically steal their profits.
So it's like, how do we find that middle ground? How do we let people be creative and make cool stuff without, stifling the whole industry?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Some people think we need to change how patents work, like make them less broad so they don't cover so many things or make them expire sooner, especially in a fast-paced world like video games where things change all the time.
Yeah, because what's groundbreaking today is like, old news tomorrow.
Exactly.
I've also heard some people talk about this idea of like open source development in games.
That's a cool concept.
Yeah.
Imagine if developers shared some of their mechanics or tech openly,
Yeah.
It would be way more collaborative.
Right.
Less about suing each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it could really lead to an explosion of creativity because people could build upon each other's work.
That would be awesome. But getting the big companies to agree to something like that seems like a whole other challenge.
It would be tough, for sure. There's no easy answer when it comes to this stuff. But if we at least understand the different sides, the history, the potential problems, then we can start to have smarter conversations about what we want the future of gaming to look like.
So we've talked about like the arguments, the history, even some like what if solutions, but where does that leave us?
Yeah, good question.
It feels like there's a lot riding on this, not just for people making games, but for what games could even become in the future.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, how we decide these video game patent things are going to have a huge impact on what we're playing years from now,
For sure.
Are we going to see like even more wild new stuff, more risks, those, whoa, how do they make that moments?
Right.
Or are we going to get stuck in this system where it only benefits the big companies, the ones that have been around forever, and nobody wants to try anything new because it's too risky?
Because it feels like if these patents get to be too much, like they cover too much ground,
Yeah.
won't that just make it impossible for like the smaller studios, the indie devs, to even get a foot in the door?
That's the big worry, right? We've already seen it happening. Companies trying to patent really broad concepts, not just like the actual code or tech stuff, but the idea itself.
Right.
And if that keeps up, it's going to be like only these giant studios with tons of money can even afford to make games.
Which would be such a bummer because honestly, some of the coolest, freshest, just plain fun games I've played lately, they're from those smaller studios. Those are the ones taking chances, not afraid to experiment.
Exactly. They're driving things forward in a way that the big guys sometimes don't or can't. They're not afraid to just go for it, which is awesome.
It's that like indie spirit, that willingness to just try stuff. That's where we get those unforgettable games, the ones
Yeah.
that really change things up.
And that's what's at the core of this whole thing. It's like, how do we make sure these developers are protected, that their hard work is valued, but also, how do we keep the door open for the next big thing, the next crazy idea?
So what can we do then, like, as gamers? I
Yeah.
mean, we're not lawyers or patent experts, but we're the ones buying and playing these games. Our opinions got to count for something.
For
Yeah.
sure. Stay informed.
Yeah.
Pay attention to this stuff. Support those devs who are out there taking chances.
Right.
Talk about this stuff, intellectual property, how it affects the games we love. Because the future of gaming, it's not just decided in courtrooms. It's on all of us.
That's a good point.
It really is.
So I guess next time people are about to fire up their console or whatever, think about the people behind the game, the creativity that made it happen, and like how important it is to find that balance so that, gaming stays awesome, full of different ideas, always pushing forward. Because games, they're more than just products, right?
Oh, absolutely.
They're experiences, they're stories, sometimes they're works of art. They deserve to be protected, but also shared and, always evolving.
Couldn't have said it better myself.